All right, welcome people to the live stream, and we are continuing our anniversary series, anniversary of Sam Langford's fights across the decades that he fought. So today, October 6th, this is actually the anniversary of four fights that I was able to find. Tony Caponi in 1911, Colin Bell in 1914, Tiny Jim Herman in 1920, and Cyclone Smith in 22. Seems counterintuitive. I'm actually going to start with the easiest one to get out the way. I'm going to start with the fight against Smith. This was a very, very old, past it version of Langford. Let me pull up Smith's season. Now, on BoxRec, they don't have like a complete record for him. It says he fought from 1912 to 22. He was from Denver, Colorado. They only have 9 bouts listed for him. He went, according to them, he went 0-3-1 in 1912, 0-2 in 13. Then he was off till 1919. He went 1-0, and then in 22 he went 0-2, both fights against Langford, and that was it. That's all they have for him. I imagine with some digging, he probably was fighting maybe on some smaller shows in that time, but it's hard to say. He ran into very late edition Sam Langford, who was still able to beat most of his opponents. That middle column there is 22. You can see in the season before, it was getting a little rough. He got 4 losses toward the end of, counting newspaper decisions, toward the end of 21. In 22, after rough starts, Harry Wills, and looks like he got Cyclone Smith in March and then got him again in October. I think it was just twice that year he got him. Yeah, so pretty tough going for Cyclone Smith. Lost the first one in 2 rounds and the second one in 2 rounds also. The first one in Huntington, West Virginia, and the fight that we're talking the anniversary of at the moment, El Paso, Texas.
Oh, shit.
So Cyclone Smith ran into an old but still highly capable Langford and got stopped twice. So that's all the record is for there. I just wanted to get that fight out of the way. Now, let me pull up our main graphic again. That's not an important fight, but that was, I think, his last fight before he went to Mexico and was in the running for the heavyweight championship in Mexico. Even though he was practically blind, he was still, on a more regional level, he was still an ass kicker. So that gets Smith out of the way. So let's talk about the other fighter of these four who fought way past it, Sam Langford, because Caponi and Bell got Langford during his prime. Tiny Jim Herman he met Langford in 20, which was like his comeback season. I'm pretty sure look at this graphic. Holy cow, Langford had a lot of fights that year. Let's talk about Tiny Jim Herman, born Oscar Koch in Hanover, Germany. Also went by Tiny Herman and Sergeant Koch, or Koch, or Koch, or Koch. I'm not sure, Koch. But lived in Omaha, Nebraska. He boxed from 1918 and 1930, so he met Langford pretty early in his career, and he wasn't that busy in 18 and 19, so really 20 was his first, if I'm remembering, 20 was his first busy year by far. And he ended up fighting 98 total times, according to BoxRec, counting newspaper decisions, 98 total fights in his career. And he actually fought Langford twice this year. I think they rematched on December 2nd, and Herman lost again in 7 rounds. Interestingly, this fight that we're talking about here, I think it's this one here, young Sam Langford fought on the undercard. It was either this or is it one of the 2 fights between Langford and Tiny Jim Herman. Young Sam Langford was actually fighting on the same event. Just a little of note. So let's pull up Tiny Jim Herman's to see. I guess I'm still figuring out the format, how to do this, but I think what I'm going to do is when I'm discussing these fighters, I'll try and do a graphic for the season prior to the fight we're talking about, and then the full season that contains the fight. So as far as I could tell, Jim Herman's 1919 is just 1 win against young John L. Sullivan. got him out and won in Washington. You see he's fighting a lot in Washington, Oregon, California, West Coast fights, a little bit in the Midwest, fought in Wisconsin, not sure where else. But largely successful. But you can see this is, so if you think about it, 1920, this is Dempsey's won the world title. You can almost see in Tiny Jim's, in his bookings that they're trying to bring him up like Dempsey, lots of short fights, 4-rounders, 6-rounders, getting him experience, hopefully getting him finishes, although he was no Dempsey. But Tiny Jim was actually a really pretty large. I'm not sure how tall he was, but I think at least once he came in around 230. This is a big guy. You know, the Tiny, obviously an ironic name there. And he was doing pretty good until he got in there with Sam Langford. And this is, again, this is early in his career. He's got size on Langford, and I would assume youth on Langford, but he wasn't ready. And this is sort of, you know, in this time, you know, the I guess once Dempsey got the title, once Willard got the title off Johnson, then later Dempsey off him, sort of the White Hopes thing was gone. But like the way of bringing up fighters, getting them lots of experience, that was something they learned from the great colored heavyweights of the teens. So by this point, they're getting a better sense of how to bring up heavyweights, specifically heavyweights. This, which is more in the manner that guys at the lighter weights seem to have used to build up. But traditionally, it seems like the heavyweights didn't, on average, have as many fights in their career, with the exception of guys like, you know, Johnson to some degree, but Langford, Jeanette, McVeigh, Wills. These guys had lots of fights. So you see different people following this pattern, but a lot of them hit their ceiling. And for Tiny Jim, at least in 1920, Langford was his ceiling. So back to the drawing board. He kept fighting. I mean, he fought for a while after this. I don't think he retired until 1930. So he still had a lot more seasons to go after this. But at this point, he was Sam Langford was on the comeback, and Tiny Jim had to pay. I'll just quickly pull up Sam Langford's 1919. Had a 4-round setback to Willie Meehan. You know, Harry Wills got the best of him 3 times, twice in newspaper decisions, once on points over 15 rounds in Oklahoma. Other than that, you know, Langford had knocked out Big Bill Tate. He also beat Big Bill on a foul that year. A couple other fights, and but not his best season. This is when people were sort of saying, "Oh, he's gone. He's way gone," and he did seem to be. But 1920 whipped himself into pretty intense shape. And you can see the results. You know, had some good wins in there. Sam McVeigh, Jeff Clark, you know, George Godfrey. He's doing work, but he can't get past Harry Wills. And also, I guess Joe Borker gets best of him on points. I'm not sure if that was a newspaper decision. Indiana, I'm not sure if that was a no decision state. If that was on points, a newspaper decision. But either way, loses newspaper decision over 6 rounds to Big Bill Tate, and on points to Lee Anderson. But gets a win over Ed Bearcat Wright this year. Pinky Lewis, you know, he's doing some stuff. I guess it was 2 wins over Jeff Clark, at least 2 wins that year. Yeah, it looks like 2. So the man's doing work, and meeting him in 1920 didn't necessarily make it easy. In fact, as far as Cyclone Smith, he could attest to the fact that meeting him in 1922 was no joke. Because if I pull 1922 up there and you look right around June 5th, you see Tiger Flowers, a great fighter. Langford had no business winning that fight. It was a southpaw, a volume attack, all the things that would be wrong. Great jabber, you know, 1-2s, all the things that are wrong for a guy who's got no eyesight, mobility, but he still got him out of there in the second round because of the experience. And a lot of these guys, even if they had some fights, the years of experience Langford had at the highest levels, even though he was far gone, he was more than a match for most of his opponents, at least late into his career, long past when, you know, in today's world, he would be forced to retire because they'd be like, you got one functioning eye, you can't do this, bro. So anyway, bringing back to Tiny Jim, he caught Langford a couple years before that, and Langford was in pretty trim shape, so he caught the wrath. But he otherwise had a respectable season. Not all of those are long fights, but he, you know, had a couple stoppages. Looks like at least a couple within those 2 seasons. You know, mostly wins and draws. Just the 2 setbacks against Langford, so not bad from him. Hopefully, he learned from that. So now let's talk about the I'm rushing a little bit because there were 4 fights on this anniversary, and I don't want to go for like a million years. So let's talk about Tony Caponi. He met Langford in 1911, so he actually met a prime Sam Langford, possibly the best version of Sam Langford. Let me pull up his seasons here. Here's his 1910. You had some wins, but he got bested in a newspaper decision by Hugo Kelly, good fighter, and Eddie McGordy, another good fighter. He started off the 1911 season. That year, it was just Sam Langford and fireman Jim Flynn. He couldn't get past them. Flynn got him out of there twice. Langford beat him in the newspaper decision in June in Canada, and then in October, this anniversary fight got him out, stopped in the 3rd round. He just had him destroyed. Caponi, I don't think he was overly large, and at this time, if you're not, it's a bad day to go up against Sam Langford and not have a considerable size advantage. In fact, to have a size advantage didn't necessarily help that much, but the odds of a draw go up at this time if the guys are big enough to take it from Sam. Let's pull up Sam Langford's season because he also met fireman Jim Flynn in this time. 1910 in February, he loses a newspaper decision to Flynn. I believe, if I'm remembering, one newspaper went each way. 2 newspapers split who they thought got the best, but the ref thought if there had been a decision, Flynn would have gotten it. But people were speculating Langford was carrying him. They rematched March 17th, and Langford put it on him, got him out of there in 8. Really, really put it on him. That was after a quick first round knockout of Nat Dewey that same month, and then mid next month, March 17th, he gets Flynn. So, this same year, 1910, he fights 6 rounds against Stanley Catchell in a no decision fight. But again, people think maybe he's carrying Catchell, trying to get a long booking on the, like schedule for 25 or even 45 rounds on the West Coast, which didn't happen. Catchell got killed, but also his people showed reluctance to book the long fight after Langford, even though Langford seems like may have not been trying to really put it on him too badly so that he wouldn't discourage the idea of a long title fight. That same year, gets battling Jim Johnson in no decision, gets the Michigan Giant Al Kubiak out of there. Some sort of scheduled fight against Al Kaufman. We'll get into that on a different time, what happened with all of that. But one of the White Hopes, Al Kaufman. Then in September, he gets the great Joe Jeanette on points over 15 rounds in Boston. Exhibition with Johnny Kilbane gets Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost, out of there in 2. Morris Harris out of there in 2. That's his 1910 season. 1911, and like I said, this is Langford. It is arguably at his best. Like I'm not sure about 09, but certainly 1910 through 1912, Langford is a killer. And it's not his only years as a killer, but really something exceptional. Especially as he was sort of floating around like middleweight to light heavyweight sized person in the various fights, fluctuating up and down in these fights. So he wasn't particularly large to be such a deadly threat across 3 divisions: middleweight, light heavy, and heavy. So 1911, Langford gets Joe Jeanette to open up the season on points in Boston. Then he goes up to New York and schools Fred Atwater. At one point, he just drops his hands and lets Atwater, who was a pretty big fella, lets him just give him a few of his best shots. Does nothing, finishes the job in the 3rd. Goes to London, schools Bill Lang. It was a Australian and a pretty decent heavyweight, but he just can't handle. He fouls out amid a severe beating from Langford, a bloodbath beating. Langford goes and gives up, seems like 40 pounds. Great Sam McVeigh in Paris, fights him to a draw. Then he's back in the U.S. He's in New York State, takes out Ralph Calloway, and then the first fight with Caponi on the 16th in Canada, newspaper decision win for him. Then he goes to New York State for a pretty decent sized run. Jack Fitzgerald, Farmer Jim Smith, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. Tony Ross, Joe Jeanette, and Caponi again, all in New York, and none of them make it the distance except for Jeanette. It looks like everyone else got stopped in that little stretch. Pretty intense. Oh, what's up, Ross? How you doing, brother? Just talking about the 4 fights we have the anniversary of today, the 6th, October 6th. And then close out the year, Langford goes to Australia. The same promoter that Hugh McIntosh, the Australian promoter who promoted his fight in February against Bill Lang, also promoted his fight in April against Sam McVeigh. Well, McIntosh isn't done, and he's actually going to after that initial fight in Paris, he's going to promote them another 6 times against each other. Closing out the year, McVeigh, slightly contentious, but gets the points win over Langford over 20 rounds. So following the smashing of Caponi, like Langford doesn't go undefeated for the season, but he goes very nearly undefeated. Now let me see if I can pull up Sam McVeigh's season. Yeah, see, there's Sam McVeigh's 1911. He's not exactly sitting around himself. Beats Langford that year as well as the draw with him. So they actually boxed 40 rounds against each other. These are the opening salvos of their 15-fight rivalry. These are the first 40 rounds they've boxed against each other. And it set the pattern for most of their engagements where Langford would lead. Langford was closing the gap, and McVeigh was fighting on the retreat with straights and hooks. McVeigh had really good hooks, so and that was sort of the pattern of their fights, although they could mix it up. But you see McVeigh's got a lot of stoppages there. Not everyone gets stopped. I mean, Langford obviously makes the distance, and it looks like Jack Lester made the distance. But Seaman Fred Parsons, Charlie Harris, Andrew Dixon, George Riddell, Alf Langford, Bill Lang, Jack Lester did not make it the full stretch. 40 rounds is crazy, right, Ross? It's just 1 year, just 2 of their 15 encounters, which is insane. And it would be insane if Langford didn't have other long series. But he actually has multiple fighters. He's had these really epic long series with some great opponents, some regular opponents. But you could I should do a chart and keep stats on Langford's win-loss draw against maybe his 15 most frequent opponents. Something like that. 15 will probably include some of maybe get down to someone like the fireman Jim Flynn, 5 fights against him. Oh, hey, what's up, Martin? Welcome. Yeah, I did this one early. I'm doing this before I crash out, so nice to see you guys. We're just talking about just briefly veering over into Sam McVeigh. But we were talking about Sam Langford's destruction of Tony Caponi, October 6th. His second time beating him that year, although one was to a no decision in Canada. This is actually it's in New York, so it wouldn't be to a decision. So I guess the one that did go the distance with Jeanette is a newspaper decision. But the other fights, Langford brought his own judge, his 2 judges. He brought his left hook and his right straight. And so Fitzgerald, Smith, O'Brien, Ross, and Caponi, they didn't get the chance to have that plausible deniability of of a newspaper decision. Like, well, technically, I didn't get my butt kicked, even if I did. So they didn't even see the end. But the great Sam McVeigh is a whole other level of danger from, say, like a Jack O'Brien, who's getting a little bit past it. And obviously Joe Jeanette, another world-class guy. Some other guys like Tony Ross, tough enough opponent. I think at least one of their fights, maybe more than one, he knocked Langford down. He was a tough guy, but just wasn't quite as good. At his best, I don't think he was quite as good. Even on his, if Langford on a bad day, him on a good day, it's a tough fight for a lot of these guys, and that was true late in the late seasons in his career where he was all jacked up, couldn't see well, couldn't move that well, a little bit fat, didn't have the same conditioning, but man, that baby could hit, and he had the experience. So the results showed that. But this version of Langford was absolutely deadly. So someone like Caponi had virtually no chance. Langford might have been able to beat him with one hand and not tucking his chin. Who knows? Langford had a pretty exceptional chin. Like I said, that fight in January against Atwater, He literally let the guy just wail on him for a little bit, and it did nothing. That water had a size advantage. Langford's chin was up there with his power and his experience. Like he had the extreme end of the spectrum in multiple assets as with regards to like successful pugilism. Pretty crazy stuff. So yeah, poor Tony Caponi. I hope he got paid out. So he caught 2 beatings that year from Langford. Let's see. I think that just leaves the one fight. But just to carry on, so like Langford, you see, he closed out the 11th season with the loss to the great Sam McVeigh. 1912. Well, they're trying to get Joe Jeanette and Jack Johnson to join him over there for this epic tournament over the heavyweight title, the color titles, but also like Jack Johnson's, world title, which he had unified, but then not really maintained as a unified title. They were trying to sort it all out, but Jeanette and Johnson weren't having it. So what happened was the guys who were there, Dan Porky Flynn, Jim Barry, Sam McVeigh, Sam Langford, they were fighting each other and the Australian dudes who were there. We pulled up McVeigh's 1911. He was smashing some guys at the end, and then through 1912. Other than Langford, you can see Langford 4-0. The last 2 stoppages, I think one of them McVeigh claimed a foul and the ref disallowed it, and then he wouldn't continue. The other one I think might have been more of a proper stoppage, but again, this isn't the part of his career I study the most heavily, as heavily as the early seasons. So some of this information, I'm trying not to say too much, trying not to improvise here, but you can see he's putting it on guys. You see Barry goes a distance over 20 rounds the first time they meet that year, but then in May 13th, he can't last. Like I said, we'll get to all this. And in fact, October 9th, so 3 days from now, is the anniversary of the third, well, I guess the fourth fight in Sam McVeigh and Sam Langford's Australian series, their 5th overall fight, but their 4th fight in Australia and their 3rd fight that they had this particular season. Can't wait to talk about that. That'll be one of the more epic ones, I believe. So that was Langford's 12, and this actually leads in. I'm going to keep going because the last fight, the 4th fight that we have to discuss, happened in 14. We'll do a quick final shout out to Tony Caponi. Big up, Tony. Digging that shirt. Let me see if I put some information down. Real name, Tony Caponi, from Italy, but living in Chicago. Boxed from 1902 to 1917. So he started the same year Langford did, it seems. But he retired the year Langford lost sight in one eye, but Langford didn't retire, and Langford went on to 26, which is crazy. But this fight with Caponi was at the 20th Century Athletic Club in New York. It was like a mercy stoppage in the 3rd round because he was just helpless. He had no chance. But he's fighting a prime Sam Langford, so being a mortal person and someone below Hall of Fame level, yeah, he pretty much had no chance. So Langford, other than the little thing, the fireman Jim Flynn, little suspiciously close fight. And that's not just me saying that. That's the people in the lead up to the final fight of this year, the second fight between Langford and Flynn. The papers were saying like no one thought that. A couple of the writers, at least, were suggesting that none of the people in the fraternity thought Langford was given his all in that fight, and they didn't think Flynn had it. And consequently, Flynn was an underdog in the second match of that year, even though he'd won the first one or he'd gotten a little bit the better. This is the same year that Langford, right before the first fight with Flynn, Langford absolutely melted Dixie Kid in their second fight in a short span. They fought at the end of 09, then fought again in early 1910. Langford just destroyed him with body shots. But then suddenly Flynn is able to do this wrestling. He was a little bit bigger than Langford, maybe 10, 15 pounds bigger, but heavier. But yeah, people didn't necessarily think it was legit. He goes up, smashes Nat Dewey with ease, and then comes back and stops Flynn. And there's video of that Flynn fight. So I can't wait for March so we can talk about that fight at extreme length. A lot of big fights in his career, so there's a lot of opportunities, but the ones with video footage, oh, forget about it. They're going to be huge. So that was 1910 Langford. Goes into 1911. Caponi catches the wrath of the nunchucks there at the end of the year. Then Langford gets bested by McVeigh, so he has to go ahead and avenge that 4 times. And then they fight to a draw in 13. So okay, shout out to him. Now let's talk about Colin Bell. Where's his picture? Tough fella, there he is. Colin Bell met the 1914 version of Sam Langford. He also met the 1913 version of Sam Langford and Sam McVeigh, and impressively fought to a draw in Australia against Langford. Not his only fairly impressive career performance, but that was possibly a highlight, not getting beaten by Langford by the 1913 version of Langford. But McVeigh got him out of there in the 16th round. He did last the 16 rounds, so I'm pretty sure he was giving up some size to McVeigh. TKO in the 16th of scheduled 20. Draws with Langford over 15. Stops Jim Carroll, Kid McCarthy, George Starr, George Slim Gilmore, and then goes the length with Bill Johnson. 6 rounds on points, so got a few stoppages there. But at the end of the year, runs into Sam McVeigh again. This time he only lost 2 rounds. McVeigh was a real puncher. It's just McVeigh had to switch it up and go on the retreat against Langford because Langford was the supreme puncher. Just didn't make sense to try and bang it out with the guy, even if you were Sam McVeigh. So you see against these other guys, McVeigh crushes people very often. He does look strong. He looks like a tough character, right? Hey, what's up, Andre? Nice to see all you guys here. This is great. I'm always torn as to whether it should be early or late, but I guess I just have to, eventually maybe I'll get some regularity in the schedule. But it's great to see you guys here in the chat while we're discussing this. So let's see. So there's Colin Bell's. Now in 14, man, so he's fighting in Australia, right? But then in 14, he goes to England. He fights Matthew Curran. DQ'd, which was easy to happen in England at this time. There was clean breaks, no holding and hitting. There were write-ups in the paper in the lead up to Sam Langford's fight with Tiger Smith about how easy it is for the Americans to get DQ'd in England, or the foreigners to get DQ'd. And in fact, Bill Lang, in the fight prior to his 1911 battle with Langford, he got DQ'd in England. So this was just one of those things. So I don't know how much we should read into Mr. Bell here getting DQ'd against Curran, but then he loses to Jeanette in England I'm not sure. One of those 2 fights, I think, was in Liverpool, the other in London. I'm not sure. But he loses over 20 rounds, May 4th, to Jeanette. Then Bombardier, Billy Wells, stops him in 2 in June, and then in October, Langford gets him out in 4. Not a good year. Not a happy season for Mr. Bell. But his 1913 was pretty good. He just ran into Sam McVeigh, and I'm sure 15 rounds against Langford probably took a little bit out of him, although he still stopped 2 guys he went into the 16th and stopped 2 guys in the 16th. After that, between the draw with Langford. But so really it was McVeigh. McVeigh, just that second fight, that's a lot of rounds to box in a single year, I think we could say. 1914, not very kind to him. Let's have a look at Sam Langford's 1913 and 1914. All right, where are my season charts? So we got to Sam Langford. So I'm not going to recap the whole thing, but just to look at all the green that's going on these graphics. Sam Langford's 1910 season, almost undefeated. Sam Langford's 1911 season, almost undefeated. Sam Langford's 1912 season, actually undefeated. Sam Langford's 1913, when he comes back from Australia, he's a little bit heavy. He does stop fights. He fights Colin Bell, who we're going to get to, in his looks like his final fight in Australia. Fights to a draw. Well done, Colin. Then he gets back home. He stops Porky Flynn in Boston, who was in Australia with him, but he stops Porky Flynn in Boston. John Lester Johnson, I think that was a colored heavyweight championship defense. Gets him, I guess, in 1, just beat him down. Unless I'm confused, I think that was. Then he fights the great Joe Jeanette in New York, New York. 10 rounds. Jeanette gets the best of it. One paper, I think it was the Times, had that a draw, maybe. We talked about this a few days ago, but all the other papers had Jeanette winning. Jeanette was such a great fighter. Lots of jabs. And Langford was, after the sixth, he started to fade, or maybe it was in the sixth, he started to fade. So the conditioning, the Australian trip coming back, apparently it's hard for him to keep his weight down. Does get Jack Lester out of there in Taft, California. Loses an upset decision to Ed Gunboat Smith, who was a very good fighter, but who was popping those jabs. Loses over 12 rounds in Boston. That was a bit of a shocker. Gunboat's people and supporters were rubbing it in, and when they met the next year, Langford got his revenge. But he does show his form at the end of the year with a fantastic 20 rounds points win over the great Joe Jeanette in Paris. So he's jumping around, man. California, Boston, both coasts of the U.S., then off to Paris in consecutive months. Pretty crazy stuff. Oh, thanks, Ross. Yeah, Langford was extremely active, and yeah, shout out to the replay crew. I'm often on the replay crew. I'll jump in, say hello, and I've got to go back and catch up on people's lives. I'm pretty scattered. I don't have a very coherent schedule, but Langford had a coherent schedule. Look at this, 1914. So this was like for several seasons back. Again, I'm just going to quickly, if you look, so 1908, 1909 were great seasons. I just don't have his graphics loaded. But 1910, badass season. Only loss was a close one, suspiciously close. 1911, the only loss is to the great Sam McVeigh, a little bit contentious. 1912 avenges that 4 times against McVeigh, does not lose. 1913 comes in a little bit heavy toward the end of the year, so Jeanette gets the best of him, but Jeanette is a Hall of Fame, one of the all-time great heavyweight fighters, so no shame in that. But Gunboat, that was a little bit of a surprise. Then gets it back against Jeanette over 20 rounds. And then 14, he doesn't go undefeated. He loses a little bit of an upset to the Joplin Ghost Jeff Clark. But other than that, he has a beast of a year, and everyone has to pay the price, almost everyone. Like he draws with Harry Wills, but he also beats Harry Wills that year. He draws with Battling Jim Johnson. He also beats Battling Jim that year. Did he fight Jeanette this year other than the draw? No. So Jeanette gets an unavenged draw, so to speak, and then Jeff Clark gets the best of him. But the series against Jeff Clark went heavily to Langford over the course of their whole careers. So Ross Clark, these fights are. So 14, he does meet Wills. In 14, they draw. And then at the end of the year, November 26th, Langford closes out his season with a 14th round knockout of Harry Wills. So this is during the time when they were starting to fight each other. But the series started to go within a couple years. Wills is the better guy. They're still competitive, but and then late in the thing, they're not hardly competitive at all. Just Wills has come into his own, like fully into his own greatness, and Langford's just too far gone to get past him, but he can still, like I said, the very end of Langford's career, he was still winning most of his fights, which is insane. And that single 1920 season is quite remarkable, although you do see Wills, Lee Anderson, Big Bill Tate, Joe Borka get the best of him, and Jeff Clark draws. But other than that, it's a serious amount of winning. So let me find my place again here. So I'm drifting off. Who are we on? We're on Colin Bell, Catching the Wrath. So Colin Bell, pretty decent 1913, although he was floating around in those Hall of Fame waters. Fight McVeigh and Langford, and then McVeigh again. It's pretty crazy. The next year, Jeanette and McVeigh. So he has a rough time of it. But other than that, not doing so bad. Langford's 13. Questions about him toward the end of the year, but then answered before the end of the year on the 20th. And I think that fight, if I'm remembering that fight, December 20th was the day after Jack Johnson and Battling Jim Johnson fought in Paris for the world title. And then Jeanette and Langford fought the next day. Just caught some of that glow from the fact that people were hyped about the other fight, at least until it happened. And this December 20th one, that's the one we have footage from. That's the 10th fight in the series. Jeanette won the 9th fight. But the 10th fight went Langford's way. Let me check the comments here. Oh, big up, Bruce. Big up everybody. Thanks, guys, for coming along. Thanks everyone listening afterwards. Great to have you. Just talking some extreme old school 4 anniversaries today, all on the same day. When I was doing the chart, I was like, oh, hell, I'm not going to get quite as much sleep. It's not just doing the chat. That's the easy part. It's doing the charts. And, just a reminder, I've mentioned this before. So Langford, this whole time that we're talking about for these earlier of the 2 fights, from the end of '08, like during 1908, he's chasing Tommy Burns for a world title shot the same way the colored heavyweight champion Jack Johnson is chasing Tommy Burns. Johnson gets it done. Stiffs Langford on the scheduled fight for May. In fact, I got a graphic. The article, though, is from the newspaper, but that photo is separate from. That wasn't with the actual article. I put that together. You can see there, that's the text of the contract. It was sent to a New York paper. And, Johnson at first said, oh, I didn't sign the contract. But then later he just said, well, I can do what I want. I don't care what the fans think, basically, was like what he said. He put it that way because he knew that he could get paid. There was so much thirst from the general public for someone to get that title off him. He knew he'd get paid regardless of whether he played the game as far as bookings he had or anything. And £1,000, which I guess was $5,000 at the time they signed the thing. That's pretty short money compared to what he stood to make. But then even later, when the offers increased, it was never enough for Johnson to get in there with Langford again. It's just how it worked out. So this whole time, these years, that all the way through 15, Langford was chasing. Although by 15, there were other guys who could get the best of him. It was more mixed results in 15. So, but leading up to that, he was chasing Johnson. It was like one of the biggest fights that could possibly have been made. Just a huge thing. Lots of different people wanted to put money up for different kinds of bookings, different round lengths, different venues, but it just never happened. But there's the proof it was going to happen. And Johnson acknowledged eventually that, he basically went from saying, oh, I didn't sign it, that was my manager, to saying, well, I don't care. I can do what I want, and I'll name my price now that I'm the champion. So that's how that goes. But Langford had just this ridiculous schedule for not just those years, but all the years afterwards when Willard was sitting on the title and when Dempsey had the title. Langford just was still fighting on. Busy. So those are the 4 fights. Tony Caponi got the wrath of prime Langford. Colin Bell got sort of Langford's reasserting himself after the questions that for part of the end of the 13th season. They were answered in December against Jeanette, obviously, but if you're not in excellent form, you're not going to beat the great Joe Jeanette that year over 20 rounds. It just isn't going to happen in any venue. And so Bell got enough of the prime Langford, and it was bad for him. Tiny Jim Herman got the comeback season Langford. So when he was sort of re-energized, he wanted that fight with Dempsey, wanted big fights. And Herman paid the price, but he went on to keep fighting. So that was just the wake up. Let me pull up his thing real quick. His season, because he was having a pretty decent season. He just wasn't ready. Even as big as he just wasn't ready. You could be 230, 240, but if you weren't really good as well as really big, Langford just gets you out of there. And he showed that. That's what he was showing at the end of his career. Being big on its own wasn't going to do nothing. Lee Anderson, who was able at certain times to fight even or even get the best of Langford. He wasn't particularly large, Wills was, but Wills was also very fast and clever, and it cut his teeth against great heavyweights, including Langford. So once Wills came into his own, that was a little bit different. He was a big guy who had the technique, had the, and he was avoided by some of the fighters, including Dempsey, because Wills had that combination of experience, technique, and actually had size. He's actually a tall guy with long reach. Langford had a good reach for a short guy, but he didn't have a Harry Wills reach. Harry Wills had a good reach for a tall guy. He just had a straight up, in an absolute sense, good open weight reach. But Langford had enough. He didn't have like T-Rex arms like Marciano. He didn't have to like get up underneath guys, although he'd like to. But he also could use those arms to like tie guys up or to post off them and throw with the other hand. So he had some options because he wasn't being short alone. He wasn't short and frail. So he actually had a larger, more barreled upper body than the big guys. If you're just talking about the muscle and maybe the rib cage and stuff. So his shoulders were gigantic. So he wasn't like small. He was just short, which affected his weight. Obviously, he takes several inches out of his middle. So Tiny Jim, I'm not sure exactly how tall he was, but I'm not sure. Like he was certainly heavier from what I saw when I was looking up this fight. Didn't really seem to help him. But maybe later in his career, if the later version of him had fought this version of Langford, who knows? But I've also at least one report that I saw that was saying he wasn't very good unless he learned to like plant his feet to throw. Like Herman wasn't exceptional. I'm not saying he didn't have a respectable record, but like doing those 4 rounders and stuff, that wasn't going to prepare him. Wasn't likely to prepare him or spare him from a likely beating at the hands of Langford. And that's what happened. He didn't make it the distance, irrespective of size. He just couldn't get there. That's not surprising. Yeah, that's right, Ross Clark. He was like 5'7.5". I've seen him reported as 5'6.5", although the one I saw was like early in his career, and he started as a teen. So I mean, I don't know when he got his final growth spurts, but yeah, think about this time. By now, he's like 5'7.5". He's maxed out somewhere around there. I don't know if that's in his boxing shoes or not, but yeah, but even old, in tiny gyms, not old, but he's just doesn't have the experience. That was the problem with a lot of these guys. Even when they got older, McVeigh, Jeanette, Langford, they could still get past most of the guys. It was still there's still tough propositions, even if, like other certain great fighters, you could still be, like when Joe Louis was clearly past his best, he was still tough. Fight with Ezra Charles, the decision, like that was a good fight. And in fact, the beginning of his fight against Rocky he was doing good. He was putting in his own work. He just couldn't keep it up. The Rock wore him down, but if you can be past your best and still be dangerous as hell, that's where Langford was. Although even like I said, not very mobile, overweight. Although he got trimmed for 1920, so he wasn't necessarily like massively overweight fighting Herman, because this was the year when he did slim down. It was the year before when he had gotten like heavier. So in 20, and I'm not sure like at what point from 21 and beyond, like he got heavy set again. It didn't last, but I'd have to research to figure that out. But you can see just a tremendous amount of his success, and a lot of the fights, were coming up. We got one of his late career fights against fireman Jim Flynn coming up on the 19th. We'll be talking about. There's a fight against young Peter Jackson on the 18th this month, but I'm not sure if it's the same young Peter Jackson. I'll have to look that up. I have to remember to, well, obviously look that up. So we have, yeah, and then we're talking about the Cyclone Smith on this day, and on the 20th, Jack Taylor, someone he beat over 15 rounds in Mexico. So that was his first fight in Mexico after beating Cyclone Smith in Texas. He actually beat Battling Owens and Cyclone Smith in Texas. Then he's off to Mexico. So that'll be fun to talk about this month. Like for going down there and sort of like maybe I'll try and put together his Mexican run. That's at least what's been collected. So who knows how many times he actually fought, you know what I mean? But yeah, even Cyclone Smith, even meeting the 22 version of Langford, that's a tough thing. Especially as I don't think he was particularly large, so and it doesn't seem like he had a ton of experience. So certainly not at the highest level, because those are often fights that are made note of in the papers and that people researchers do end up finding pretty easily. So maybe he had a lot more experience in minor fights in those years, but most likely not against notable opponents. So it's pretty tough. And that's a career. I don't know when that photo's from, but that's like a late career of Sam Langford. I think that's after he had the damage in the one eye. But his eyesight was pretty rough, and he had said in his memoirs, syndicated memoirs, in the paper that he damaged his eyes when he was young. So he was actually had some impairment his whole life since he was a teenager. I don't know how accurate that was, but that was something that was said. Certainly from 1917 on, when Fred Fulton smashed his eye up in Boston, he had some serious issues, which you would think, would affect his depth perception and among other things. But then later when he's getting the cataract, beating like Tiger Flowers, beating anyone in 1922 is absurd, especially someone like Flowers. So Cyclone Smith, there's no shame in getting schooled in 2 rounds in this fight, or was it 2 rounds in the first fight, March? So yeah, getting schooled in twice within 4 rounds total. That's okay. Sam Langford's still dangerous. I thought it was really cool. The boxer had a pretty good photo of, looks like from the paper or from a book, of Cyclone Smith, even though he barely had any fights. That's always a nice surprise, because there are fighters that have more fights than that don't have one and don't have a photo in BoxRec yet. I actually need to send them a couple that I found of guys. There's a few they don't have, not necessarily important guys, but Billy Chisholm there on the top left doesn't have a picture, I don't think, in BoxRec. I got them they very graciously put up that picture of Andy Watson, fourth from the left. Billy Jordan, that's not on BoxRec yet. Timmy Kearns on the right, top right, that is. Burgo is. They put up the Danny Dwayne I sent them, which I believe that version there, that photo there, second from left in the bottom row. They already have Walcott. They don't have Kid Griffo yet. Fourth from the right. Fourth from the left, and then right, fifth from the left on the bottom's Shadow Mars. They don't have that up yet. So we'll see if I can get them to do that. I just don't want to be too pushy. Those guys got plenty of stuff on their plate. They don't exist solely to cater to my fascination with this small time period. But yeah, I'll send them the stuff, see what's going on. So there we have it, folks. Anniversaries of 4 fights on this day. I'm not sure when the next one is. It might even be tomorrow. I don't know. Somewhere or other, I have a graphic I made. Here we go. Let's see what we got coming up. 6th. That looks like the 7th to me. That looks like tomorrow we'll be doing one of his fights, a no contest. Seems like with Jack Blackburn. So we'll be talking about the Jack Blackburn rivalry at some point tomorrow. Should be cool. Folks, thanks. I want to thank you and give my appreciation for you tuning in. I'm not going to stay on any longer. I probably should get myself some sleep, but we are continuing the Sam Langford series, the anniversaries of his fights. And to the degree I'm able, I'll do one every time there's an anniversary. I'll do at least something. Or in an extreme circumstance, I might have to do like a weekly recap this week in Sam Langford. But for the time being, at least, it seems like we're able to just keep trucking like this. So we'll do the final shout out to the guys who are involved. So Tony Caponi, who met him in 1911, didn't go his way. And then Mr. Colin Bell, tough looking character, like you guys said. Tiny Jim Herman. And then Cyclone Smith. Well, all right. I hope you have a fantastic day. We'll see you tomorrow for a little discussion on one of Langford's several fights against the great Jack Blackburn. Have a good one, folks. Take it easy now.